So I've just watched the Louis Theroux documentary, and I want to do my initial thoughts on it while I've just finished watching it. So it's called Inside the Manosphere, and it's currently on Netflix. And my man Louis, I have like the biggest crush on Louis Theroux. What a god of a man. But anyway, it's not why I'm here to do this video. So I'm going to tell you about the documentary from a female perspective, and this isn't about bashing men. The documentary obviously is concerning from the perspective of a woman, but what it's done that's really interesting for me is it's connected some dots that didn't make sense in my head previously. So these male influencers, what was really interesting in this documentary was it got the perspective of kind of these male influencers' fans. So one thing that struck me initially was this concept of women are born with worth and men aren't born with worth. So a lot of the fans were like, oh, these influencers have appealed to me because they showed me that I do have worth, because as a man I've been born with no worth. And Louis was like really confused by that comment. He was like, what do you mean you're born with no worth? They were like, you know, this is what the influencers have been telling us, we've been born with no worth, and we have to find our place as a man. But these people understand us, these men understand us as men. And so Louis was inquiring, well, do women, are they born with no worth? And they said they're born with tits and, you know, the beauty of the face, so they're already born with worth. As a female, that's a really interesting perspective, because what these influencers have managed to do is they talked directly about how there was a feminist movement and there's nobody talking to men. What I see is we've always had in society a power dynamic between men and women. And then what's happened is that these influencers have found a space where they can appeal to young men and say to them, and basically pitch them as the minority and say, you are actually now outnumbered. Women have had a feminist movement and you've been left behind, which I think is a very interesting take, because women are still statistically less well off in career pay. They take on more of the homely duties. We don't have an equality. We still don't have an equality. I understand for my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, it was completely different, but men are not disadvantaged. But what's really interesting is these influencers have managed to pick up on that space where men feel that they deserve acknowledgement, and then they've tried to push these old ideologies about gender through that vessel. So it's been saying, like, for example, one of the influencers said that they know what women want. They can have multiple partners, and the women can't, that their wives, their partners. They know how to pleasure women and they know exactly what women want. And when Louis questioned, well, do you ask women? Is this a conversation that you're having with women? No, men automatically know what women want. And this is kind of going into some of, I've found on dating platforms, particularly men will say, I'm a dom. Women like to be submissed and like to be submissive. And that's something I've always had an issue with as well. And under the veil of sexual preference, it's a dominance. It's still a power dynamic. And then they found these women who have kind of backed up this perspective for them. But what's interesting is two other components. This is something I already know, and I am quite concerned about the ability, the reach this has for young men and women to believe that this is true, which Louis does challenge throughout the documentary. But two other components. One of the influencers mentioned, you know, he's pushing gambling sites, he's pushing for OnlyFans accounts, and he says that he thinks it's morally disgusting that women are on OnlyFans accounts, but he's after the money. So like Louis said, one huge component is these influencers are selling products, and they're selling misinformation on these platforms. They're being controversial for the sake of getting more likes, to sell more products, to get famous on Instagram, to have the lifestyle. So being controversial about women is fine. What also is interesting is that they've kind of transitioned from being controversial about women to a space where one of the influencers says, we've graduated out of the manosphere space into politics. And this is where something clicked for me, because this explains to me, someone from the outside, why someone like Trump came into power. Because the ideology of these manscapers, this toxic masculinity, this dominance, this misogyny, is packaged online, and then Trump's jumped on that bandwagon. He's got very friendly with these people. I mean, he shares the same ideology anyway, so, you know, he famously said he'd grab women by the genitals, and I understand why that controversial statement really seemed to just disappear. Even on big platforms, it disappeared because young men, huge influencers, but also their fans, believe this ideology. They're listening to it. That there's all this clickbait that in this documentary, they are saying horrendous things. So it makes sense that someone like Trump actually appeals to them. He's speaking their language, which I think is very, very disturbing, but it is a fact. And then thrown on top of that, what we found now is there's this kind of conspiracy theory sphere. And there's other ideologies on top of this misogyny that is helping promote these people on their platforms, saying controversial things about the Jewish community is a massive one. Conspiracy theories, pedo rings. Like in this video, it's talking about these influencers just baiting random people, getting them to come see them and exposing them as potentially pedophiles, which again is another caveat for more violence. Under the ruse of we are protecting citizens, but actually it's just a video of somebody beating somebody up. This mixture of conspiracy theories, this mixture of misogynistic behaviour on real platforms, making decisions. Like Trump is a president who makes decisions about the law, and this warped concept that there's almost like a resentment of women from these men. They talk about how their mums had chaotic lives and they didn't have men present when they were growing up. That the language, like one of them had a podcast and he was basically inviting OnlyFans content creators, women, to bait them, to bait their looks, to essentially say, and again, there was a whole conversation about body count, which is how many people you've slept with, and how women, it makes them less, which we have heard from Victorian England and even centuries before, that women should be virgins and they should be pure, but men can sleep with whoever, and that it has any bearing on their worth. It's a very problematic world that we're living in, but I see it reflected in people in society. This idea, they really connect with men under this guise of masculinity is dead because the whole world, feminism, is asking us to be more feminine and we're losing our masculinity. The masculinity that these people are producing is a toxic masculinity. It's not a healthy masculinity. Men dominating women, men saying that they have the right to choose how to pleasure women, how many women to have in their life, the standards women should be keeping in the home and the cooking. That's Victorian fucking England, or even before that point. That's not healthy masculinity. Healthy masculinity is being able to support a woman in whatever decisions she wants to do, support her emotionally as well as financially. I've never believed in this concept that men should go out and be the providers and women should to protect the home and whatever else. That's not something that I think is a true reflection of a healthy dynamic. If a woman decides she wants to have children and stay at home, and the man and woman decide that's best for their individual family, that is your choice. But I don't need a man to provide for me. It's reiterating a really old gender structure, and it's using influencers, and these people don't even understand what they're saying, but but it's connecting with people for some reason, which is the problematic issue. Young people are identifying with this and they're connecting with it. And for me, I find that terrifying, and I don't even know where we would begin. And I feel like, very much like Louis Theroux at the end of this documentary, very unsure where we go from here, because there's so much misinformation. Like on the podcast, it was talking about, there was a video clip of somebody claiming to be a doctor, saying that basically DNA of male sperm stays in a woman's body her entire life and can lead to degenerate children, lead to children she has in the future looking like her ex. Like, Louis was dumbfounded by this video, and he was like, this is a perfect example of misinformation on the internet. And the idea now that when you try and challenge misinformation, people goad you. They tried to goad Louis. They weren't respectful of his opinion, talking over. There's expletives that then we have to get nasty. This is the issue, that we can't call out and make clear what is true and what is not, and challenge these ideals, because men are jumping on this bandwagon and they're getting quite defensive and aggressive in protecting it. This is now leading, what I felt was quite damaging, is that there was a lot of anti-Semitic comments in this documentary from these influencers, and it is having detrimental effects in the real world. That we have had more anti-Semitic terrorist attacks and attacks on communities, and this is a direct result, because people think that this is justified behaviour. We're having random people be goaded into fights in the street, even in this documentary, because they might be a paedophile. There's a lot of this misinformation's causing a lot of violence. It's causing a lot of chaos in society, and I think we need to kind of look at why young men feel like this appeals to them, because in the US that is normal, and it's really destructive. And I don't know how we address this, but I think it is something that as a society we really need to look at how we move forward with social media to a place where we invite connection between genders, between religions, between communities, and not disconnection like what is happening right now.